So, a very good evening yet again, Sundays. I know we've been a little erratic with our schedule, with things going haywire, thanks to the monsoon gods and goddesses. But here we are glad again that Dr. Molly Kaushal is going to continue her Himalayan Nomad series. And of course, it's dedicated to somebody very close to her, and we are glad that Deepika, right? Deepika, the daughter, is also here. So, Dr. Kaushal will be talking about negotiating spaces, gender and empowerment among the Gaddis. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, Dr. Kaushal needs no introduction, but she is an academic, a curator, and a filmmaker who's a professor of performance studies and heads the Janapada Sampada Division of the IGNCA. Associated with the IGNCA since 1992, she has been engaged in the research, documentation, and preservation of cultural heritage of diverse communities in India. She teaches courses on Indian folklore at the center and has launched several new research initiatives, conceptualizing and supervising several field studies, surveys, and research projects at the Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts. There is so much more to her and her amazing work, her publications, and also as an inspiration of sorts for young budding anthropologists who engage with intangible cultural heritage. And today she will of course talk about gender and empowerment. This is in continuation of her series, and she will do another talk and another one, and we are really looking forward to listening to all that she has to give us in knowledge. So, Dr. Kaushal, over to you. And for those who have just joined us, please, I would request you to mute your mics and put your videos off. And those of you who do not know me, I'm Dr. Sonali from the Himalayan Institute of Cultural and Heritage Studies. We do everything Himalayan. So over to you, Dr. Kaushal. Looking forward to your talk today.
Lovely. Thank you so much. As usual, you've been very generous with the introduction. Uh, thank you for doing that. And as she's already said, that this series I have dedicated to my Raki brother, Sri Ramlalji Thakur, who was taken away from us by COVID. So, so to his memory, I'm going to talk about today. We had talked about histories and identities in our first lecture. I'm sorry, today I'm not showing you any pictures because I just didn't have time to sit down. But maybe in the next lecture, I'll be more ready with my material. Now, when I going to talk about the gender and empowerment and the Gaddis and the nomads, it becomes very complicated. And generally, if we see that in earlier writings, not just about the Gaddi women, but if you look at the colonial writers, anthropologists, administrators writing about women, empowerment in any way was not a question. Gender was also not a question. So they would basically look at the women of any community, folk or tribal, and particularly tribal because they were so very different from their own Victorian moralities and issues and agendas of the Enlightenment. And they often kind of, most of the writings objectified women in terms of, oh, those women are so beautiful and they are so pure and chaste, or they, or they are hardworking, or they are lazy, or they are promiscuous. And this kind of colonial writing, we see that even early anthropological writings by Indian anthropologists also, we see that, this trend kind of continues. And also maybe perhaps much of this writing was coming from male anthropologists, and there was a very specific male gaze that was looking at the other woman of the others, So So it was easy to talk about their sexual practices. It was easy to talk about their physical attributes. It was easy to call them either hardworking or lazy or whatever. These and the Gaddis have also been, Gaddi women were also looked both in these two very oppositional kind of categorizations, and it is not till we have the anthropologists coming in with D.N. Majumdar and our modern anthropologist Khaka is there, Nongburi, and we begin to look at our women uh, in a better contextual framework where woman is not as an object, but she is seen more in terms of her role, her position in the community, what power, what rights she has, what influences she kind of has, her economic value, her economic worth, and if what are the if she has any voice within the community, and then what are the spheres and areas in which these voices are very, very prominent. Uh, so when I began to work on the Gaddis, now I think that we have to now look at two very distinct stages within the Gaddi community. And when I began work, there were hardly that you could call a well-educated middle class. And now when we are sitting here in 2023, there's a large, very well-established middle class population of young Gaddis. Most of them have migrated also. They are, and migratory homes are no more just Kangra, but it is Delhi, it is the metropolis, and they're educated, they're well established into. So women have got an empowerment also through education, through also this shift that has happened. But when I look back at those traditional spaces, and again, why I've called this negotiating spaces, that I do not, and that's why I was looking forward to last night's lecture, which didn't happen, is that, this romanticization that happens, and unless and until we kind of have the context in which we are discussing gender or we're discussing women, it is always we end up with a certain kind of exotica attached to the other. So whether it's the Gati as a community, or whether a tribal group or a tribal woman, or for that matter, a Gadi woman. Like you and I, as we are sitting across, our empowerment, where does it come from? How do we empower ourselves? It's not like you can say, oh, we guaranteed by constitution, whatever. We are financially independent. But then there are many women who are educated, who are financially independent, and are they able to negotiate their positions within their workspaces, within the family structures? Or so this whole thing of empowerment really happens is, one is that the structures, the social structures that are there in the society, and secondly, how much the woman has the capability to work within those structures to empower. Now, any patriarchal, patrilineal, patrilocal families, the space for women's negotiation, if we look at modern family structures, is there, but it's not so easily negotiable, in the sense that domestic violence happens, divorces happen, uh, and so many other things. So were these Gaddi women, when they were located in their more traditional spaces, how were they negotiating their spaces? Is there something from that community, from that women, that we can learn today? Or even modern Gaddi women and Gaddi girls, young girls, who can learn from how they can actually negotiate spaces available within patrilocal, patriarchal, patrilineal family structures to empower themselves. So this is, which then immediately changes the entire focus on how we're going to look at Gadi women. Uh, you know, there, okay, like let's say I've taken the class of women that I'm going to talk about in this is that I'm going to firstly look at the daughters within the family. Then I'm going to look at the married out daughters. Then I'm going to look at the married women in their marital homes. I'm going to look at the widows, and I'm going to look at a category of women which is more or less probably now it may be there or may not be there, but her role, she is will her presence, if it's still there in the Gaddi society, has a different function and a role than say when it was traditionally this tradition was starting. They called sadhans, and the sadhan etymologically immediately thinks that we're talking about renouncers and we are talking about ascetic, but here we're talking about a very different kind of category that sadhan is, and we'll come to it by and by. I'll have to keep looking at my notes, sorry, because I'm not, as I told you, that I've not had the time to look at. So if you look at an ordinary traditional, in a traditional menu, you look at an ordinary Gaddi female, whether she is a daughter or she is very important. She's very important even economically within the agrarian system. And now Gaddis, yeah, these spaces that we're going to talk about are somehow so connected with the land and not really with their nomadic activity, with their shepherding activity, but it nonetheless will throw light that probably within that, migrating spaces, the empowerment could be actually negotiated much more if it can be negotiated within the four walls of what the Gaddis call is the chul. Chul is the hearth. So very important area of a Gaddi household is the hearth area, the oven where the cooking happens. And most of the tension, most of the hierarchies, whether they're social, whether they are ritual, they all kind of, gather around this, the control over this chul. The chul is also symbolic of the female head of a patriarchal family. So basically, she will be mother-in-law, and then you have, of course, the daughter-in-law, which gradually is coming into this family. But even before she makes an entrance, while the marriage is happening, and of course, she takes on the lineage of her husband, but it's so beautifully done that her association with the natal family is never completely cut off. Whereas you will see in other agrarian societies and in other agrarian systems that, once a woman is married out, she completely belongs to that lineage, and her relationship to her natal family is that of a guest, is that of someone who must be invited, like the Gati women, to various, festivals and rituals, and, gifts must be bestowed on her. But here, the relationship that remains with the natal family goes much deeper than just she being a guest. Uh, and that relationship is strengthened by various rituals that exist, and one of the very important rituals here is that of the I will focus on two of them today. Is one is that is after she passes away. Now, when she's passed away, there is a full ritual ceremony that happens, of course, at her marital home with her kin and her own children and husband or whoever perform these rituals. But very interestingly, that this mourning period is also observed with a complete ritual setting, even at her at a natal home. And also there are fixed roles for everyone, that who's going to mourn for how long. And let me just, yeah, So let us see if I can find where I can kind of give you an examples of who's going to mourn for how long. But okay, even forget that. The brother has a certain obligation to mourn for a certain period. His children have an obligation to mourn for a certain period. But even more importantly is that a sacrifice used to be conducted even at a natal family, and this sacrifice of the goat is or of the ram was done to provide limbs and body. Like we have the daspindi, they also have the daspindi, but more importantly was that on the 10th day that they will sacrifice this lamb or a goat, and this is to provide limbs to the soul that has departed. So the role of easing her transition and obtaining a new birth, the responsibility was not just of her husband, her own children, but more importantly also of her natal family, which tells us about the ties which continued even after the marriage in terms of her association with the lineage. So she kind of was not giving up her lineage, her father's lineage, upon entering her husband's lineage. That's one very important factor that we have to keep in mind. Secondly, is that if you will talk to these people, if you talk to the Gaddis, like all of us, and in any other village also, they'll tell you कि नहीं नहीं lineage तो सिर्फ पति की तरफ से है, it is the man's lineage only, children come from men only, not from women, children belong to the male lineage. So of course the discourse apparently will be conducted in somewhat a similar manner. But when we look at again the rituals that are still present, and even now if you'll go to say places like Ukti and Chobia, which are still not so much uh, moved away from traditional ways of being, that you can still find these practices, and most of the young Gaddis probably don't even know about it, and probably don't even indulge in those ritual activities anymore. But they had a very profound meaning for the traditional social structure, the family structures as they existed, and of course they continue to exist with whatever changes that may have come about. And that was the presence of a very interesting deity called Kelu. Now, if you look at various descriptions of the colonial writers and also of Indian anthropologists, this one word given about this deity, and it said that he is the deity of abortion. That's about all, and it's a deity that belongs to the woman's maternal family. Now, this Kelu is worshipped on Thursdays, and he's worshipped only by the women. Even if she has her children, her son becomes 12 years of age, he's not allowed to participate in this worship. The husband is not allowed to participate. There is a little chadar that she has, which she wears when she's doing the Kelu worship, and which is then later kind of locked up in a trunk, and the man was not even supposed to look at that sheet. So you can clearly see that there are two very, very strong lineages that are at work here. And the maternal lineage of the mother becomes very, very important. Now, who this Kelu was and why the Kelu was worshipped, and he was obviously not just that he could induce abortion is just one character that he had, but he was actually the deity that represented the raw, fertile rasa, the sap that the woman was bringing along with her, which would be her maternal great-grandmother to grandmother to mother to her, and passed on to her daughter. So this worship was very important, and it also kind of made her ties with her native family very, very vocal in those terms. And that is why Kelu was also feared. In fact, very interestingly, one of my midwife, she was a midwife, Panti, who explained to me. And now when their marriage happens, there is a walnut that is kept atop the marriage canopy, and also Kelu is supposed to be worshipped in a walnut tree. So what is this walnut, and why is associated with केलू? वॉलनट इज केलू. शी इज टेलिंग मी कि ये जो अखरोट है वो केलू है. ही इज द सीड, वो बीज है. He bestows children. When a child is born, the woman must go to her natal village and pray to him. His shrine may be located in the maternal grandmother's or great grandmother's village. The women will go there and worship. So the very fact that the children that are born, the Kelu being the maternal seed, recognizes the fact that the lineage or the progeny that is being, the future progeny that is being brought in is not exclusively in the male lineage lines. And when I was in Kukti, it was very interesting, and I don't think that anybody's worked on that, nor have I gone back to Kukti to do that work. Is that there was a tradition of double descent, and this I accidentally discovered because one of my research assistants, he was a very bright young doctor who met with an accident and passed away later. He belonged to Kukti village, and we went with him. And there he said, I have जब गोत्र बताते हैं, जब lineage बताते हैं, तो मेरा माँ का भी गोत्र है और पिता का भी गोत्र है. And then I worked on that tree, and I really discovered that the double descent was something which was prevalent among the Gaddis at what stage, when probably more and more sedentarization happened and more Hindu influences began to seep in and local traditions were forgotten. It purely became a patrilineal and there are a lot of other issues that tell us that possibly it is possible that there were also very strong matrilineal tones at some point of time in the Gaddi society. Now I will so I explained this, and now I will explain. I'm not going to go into mother-daughter-in-law relationships, but just saying that despite whatever beautiful, passionate narratives, and if I can get hold of one narrative, I will tell you, yeah, that how women are exploited, or how daughter-in-laws were exploited and how bad they were. And one woman said, जब इंदिरा गांधी का राज आया तब तक उसको बहुत सताते थे and all. So there are a lot of passionate narratives that come from the community, but as in the case of the earlier one, where the patrilineal tones of patriarchal tones are very profound in everyday conversation, you actually realize that deep down the families function because there is much more to a very straight surface level discourse that's happening. So there's one very interesting discourse that I would like to tell you here. So this was a group discussion, and I had a lady called Punno Devi from Pulni. I had Kanta and Kaushalya from Barmor, and there were two men, Shobharam from Karamuk and Manikchand from Seri. Now, very interesting, Punno Devi and Shobharam. Shobharam was such an impulsive talker. He just loved to talk, and he'll go on and on for hours on any one issue. And Kanta and Kaushalya were really those vibrant, feisty women, They were in the Mahila Mandal, and they were like, they couldn't care for any of the social norms that, people may expect from them. Very, very independent women. And Punno Devi was like, as very balanced and if I can use within the quotes, I don't have a better word, a very sober, kind of a personality. And Manik Chand was, of course, my research assistant. He was Brahmin. Then also they were all caste issues. Shobharam was a Brahmin, Manik Chand was a Brahmin, and Kanta, Kaushalya, Punno Devi, they were Rajputs. So, and so let us see what the discourse was. So both Punno Devi and Shobha Ram, they insisted कि daughter-in-law को तो बहुत बुरी तरह से रखते थे, उसको घर से चौके के बाहर रखते थे. I've already said that the hearth was a very important area. So in terms of, who will sit in which part of the chokka was also very important. There was a, right side would call Kanseru, the male head would sit there. On the left side was the Majani, the cook, the female head, she will sit there. And then anti-clockwise, all others would sit. The children were not allowed to sit on the chonka, but they'll sit below the chonka, but they could keep their thalis onto the chonka platform and eat. But they are saying, but for the daughter-in-law, nahi daughter-in-law, that's new daughter-in-law, there was no place for her. The sas would never allow her to cook also in the chonka, because, if she allowed that, then a certain authority over the earth would be snatched away from her, and she didn't want that at any cost. And even if she allowed her to cook, she would not be allowed to serve. And that has a lot also to do with a lot of anthropologists will, especially those who have read Raw and Cooked of Lewis Strauss, will also know that how the raw produce is then converted into the cooked rasa, and this rasa is then seen as someone which will feed the lineage as well as the ancestors, the mains. So only the female head, who was also, in a manner of speaking, the hearth of the house, wo chulhe ki thi, and the people, the family members or a human being is also called chulhe ki dhood se bana hai. So this whole concept of the chul being the lineage womb, and which not only gives birth but also members and of its dead members, is something where plays a very, very significant role here. So now he said, these days position of women is better, but earlier she was treated very badly both by her parents and in-laws, and we'll come back to that. Parents would not marry her off till she was very old, about 30, 32, because of the free labor they received from her. After marriage, she was sent to her husband's house with just one dress and a pot. And this is, a lot of people did talk about earlier marriages in this way. The in-laws treated her almost like a slave. And in her husband's house, she occupied the space near the door. And this is grossly exaggerated, passionate account. And this is immediately contested by my young researcher, Manak Chand, who says, he was listening and he was kind of, not liking what he was hearing. And he said, but sab to is tarah ke nahi hai. Not everybody is not like that. There are many who are different. Not everyone is bad. There are also those who would say, it is very cold, Ladi, please come to the, chula, come to and become, also warm yourself. So both these narratives, the intervention by Manak Chand and what Shobha Ram is saying, that is actually, it both affirms the position of Shobha Ram as well. It also contests. But when we actually look at how Gaddi households were working, so women, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law more or less enjoyed a very cordial relationship. And if they were not cordial and there was a fight about the chula, the hearth would be divided. So, even till say about a decade back, you could still see houses, and I'm sure as you move higher and into, remote villages, you can still come across houses where, they one room has 4 different chulas, and it belongs to different sons in the family. So right from the beginning, the daughter-in-law could be given her right on her chula, and she could run her household. But this division of chulas did not necessarily mean that, and that will bring me to another category, another class, and another space for negotiating power, is that the property would not be divided until the fathers died. Now, when the father would die, there would be like 4 divisions. I mean, there'll be like divisions for the equal distribution among the sons, and there'll be a share of the father. Now that father's share would go to his widow. We go a little back from here and we come to the king's time when the Chambyals were ruling, the Chambyal dynasty was ruling. The land was a common, the property, it was a common property. The king was the custodian and nobody really had an ultimate control over the land. It could not be sold, it could not be purchased, it could not be handed down to anyone except in the male here or male members of that particular clan. The land had been given it or believed to be have given by the king, and if there was no male here in the strict male line, the land will go back to the king and then he could give it to the Raja, could give it to someone else. So this was a very, very strong, very rigid patriarchal system of inheritance, but this was the system which actually allowed that space for women to negotiate power within this very, very rigid patriarchal inheritance system that the Gaddis practice. Now, if suppose the father has died and the wife has no children, the husband has died and wife has no children, and if in that family there's no male here, then the land would either go to the clan, other members of the clan, or it will go back to the Raja. Now, in order to keep this property within the family, they allowed women to either marry their younger brother-in-laws, or they allowed them to marry the hearth of the house. And if she married the hearth of the house, she could have a relationship with any of the male members in the clan, but her dignity was maintained and she was never ever asked to reveal the name of the person with whom she was having an affair or a relationship. Now, if through this relationship, even after 10 years of the death of her husband, if a child was born, he was considered to be the legitimate son of the deceased husband. He was called Chakhandu, but there was no stigma attached, and the property of the deceased husband would then go to the son of his wife, who may be from either from the brother-in-law or from brother-in-laws within the community. Now, when I was being explained this, I had another research assistant, Jagdish Kumar, and he was also extremely disturbed from Sachui. And he says, no, how can that be? You know, this was being told to me by Nanku from Seri, a very old man and a Banda who was a singer of the Saveen and in Nuala ceremonies, and very well respected person. So then Nanku explained him, all kind of marriage rituals that happened, the role of the Pachak, the role of the Kangana, and so after explaining all those rituals, Jagdish seemed to kind of, settle down and agree that this is possible. But I saw this actually in case of Shobha Ram, and one day Shobha Ram came and we were talking about this only, and he was very disturbed and he was like very abusive towards his sister-in-law who was widowed and who now had a child. He says she doesn't even tell, who the child is from. And it's not like from us. In the means, it's not the close brothers. It is someone else, and it's probably not even our clan, and it is so bad. So I said, but you can't ask her, no? You can't force her. Your tradition doesn't allow. So this whole, because now the new property law rules were there, and the concept of the private property was there, so the tensions began to emerge. Earlier, it belonged to the entire lineage. Now it belonged to the family. And they were scared that, this she will move out of home and go and live with someone else. And she'd also take the property with her. And she also has the law on her side. Now, the modern constitutional law form. So these were the issues and tensions that were existing. And I presume that they can actually keep flaring up as convenience in the favor of one or the other in any given family scenario becomes very, very boiling issue. And then one section can and will invoke the tradition, another the modern, and there were 3 4 such instances that were happening. And I don't think that the modern youth of the Gaddis is even aware of that. And Gaddi women are now thinking that property is their right, but they never claim that property like any other Indian. Mostly the cases that women after marriage don't claim their share in their father's properties. So they say that we've given you whatever in dowry. Now, also the fact that the women could exercise power within the patrilineal patriarchal system was also the various ways of marriages that were prevalent. And there was the very preferred, and that is even up till now, it's an isogamous system where, there is marriage between the equals. So for a long time, there is an exchange to and fro between husbands' collaterals and wives' collaterals, who are like, getting married to each other. So Jagdish, like he explained, suppose I get married, so that my cousin will get married to my wife's cousin, and someone else's cousin to someone else's cousin. So there were villages that came like say, for example, Sachui had a lot of marriages with Malkota, or Malkota will give a lot of women to Sachui, and women of Sachui will come back to Malkota. So even if there was torture, it could not go beyond a certain limit, because it will have repercussions on the man's own sister, which was also married to his wife's brother. So there were these control mechanisms going on. But before this, there was this whole ritual of Bata Sata, in which there was a scarcity of women, or women were valued very much. The marriage would only happen if you can bring your sister in exchange. So there was a direct transfer of women. Husband will bring a wife for his future wife's brother, and it's only then the brother would let his sister go to the future brother-in-law. So this has even continued and is preferred, but it's no more, as I said, it's not a direct exchange. So there were these balances that were done. Then very interestingly, which you read very often, is this whole tradition of Ghar Javantri, and that you find in a lot of tribal societies and in a lot of village societies, also even Hindu societies, of the past, that there was this marriage would happen only if the future son-in-law agrees to serve at his father-in-law's house for a certain number of years. And here in this case was 7 years, and sometimes will even go beyond that. So he'll come and live in his future father-in-law's house and work as either as a par who will go with the sheep and the herd, or work in the fields when it was needed. And even after 7 years, the father could put some other condition and not marry off. And then, there are many cases when writ petitions were filed to the Raja, and the Raja would decide, and finally the marriage would happen. And it is true, then she will only be sent with one lota and whatever, a little bit. Now, also within that, if suppose a woman doesn't like her husband, or if there was a man who fell in love with the wife, and wife agreed to elope with this man or have a contract another marriage, he had to give a very small fine to the husband, and the woman could go. So the whole pressure to retain the woman was very much there with the man, with the husband and his family. And Gaddi homes are very, very well settled. They're not, as I said, no divorces happening. It's not that someone is eloping with someone. So they kind of worked out a very well system where the hearth could be given, and but the property would wait. And suppose the husband dies before the property has been divided, then also they had this whole matriarchal system, which actually went in favor of the widow more than say in favor of the clan or the lineage, but this inheritance law kind of provided her with this space. So widows could remarry, so she could actually, it depended on her. So if a married woman, because she let her rasa flow and she created the lineage, she could negotiate her position. The widow had the power either to withhold the flow of her rasa, or she had the choice to release it, and choice to release it to whomsoever she wants without having disclosed his name. So these were the spaces available where both the married and the unmarried women could married and the widowed women could exercise power. Now, the third category of women is very interesting, is what is called sadhan, and I know Sukrita is taken up by this category, and I think everybody else would be, because this is not something that we commonly come across, and also among the Gaddis, it's not something that you commonly come across. And I'm not sure if there are any new sadhans in the making, but if they are not, I would suggest let there be a few. It's an amazing way, again within that very strict male inheritance principle, that the category of the sadhan emerges within the Gaddi society. So these are women who are not married. Firstly, the first thing is that they are not married women. Secondly, they are not renouncers or ascetic. The only renunciation that they've done is that they've said that they will not marry and they will not produce children. They will not perpetuate someone else's lineage, but continue to remain part of her father's lineage. A lot of people confuse the word sadhan with sadhu, and so Philemore and a lot of other studies, and also Srivastava, who worked on the renouncer women, thought of them as a category of what you have, sadhu or sadhan. And in Kangra also there was this whole tradition of the sadhan category of women, and they were looked more like, that these women, in order to enjoy power, kind of the only idiom that was available for them to express their identity was through renunciation, through the religious, spiritual category of a sadhu. But that is not what really, and Gaddis are not particularly interested in renunciation. I mean, for some reason or the other, someone may have become a renouncer, but Gaddis do not have any sadhu sannyasis that are born from or come out of the Gaddi community. But there are, of course, a lot of sadhus and sons who've been migrating, who've been coming, staying there. And in fact, two very powerful names are Krishnagiriji Maharaj, and I talked about him in one of my earlier talks, and Prem Giriji, who have their Krishnagiriji and Prem Giriji, and he has a temple also, little shrine, and he did a lot for the upliftment of Gaddi girls and of Gaddi society. But no sadhu is known to be a Gaddi sadhu, unless, there are some recent ones that I don't know. But it's not traditionally, the Gaddis never renounce themselves. So who is the sadhan, and where is she borrowing her idiom from? And what defines her? What is, so her outer attributes, if we take, is a clothing. So sadhan in the Gaddi sense is a woman who's become a male or who's become a man, and who's accepted by the community as a male member of that community. So then one of the distinguishing marks could be her clothing. So she'll have a cropped hair, she'll wear the male dress, she will go to the pastures along with other shepherds who were basically her extended family, her brothers, cousins. She will go move about in the dars. She was allowed in the temples that were prohibited to women otherwise. She could even plow the land, which is like not allowed, because women are not allowed to plow the land because it's putting the seed in, and it's very interesting that she was allowed to do. She could conduct the funeral rites, and the property would be, after the father's passing away, property would be given to her. So she was the main inheritor. So in order to receive that property, she had to become a male. And when I talked to some of these sadhans at that time, and basic reasons were really family reasons. Either they were no male members other than her father, or her parents were very poor, or maybe their means were very, very few. So in order to support her family, she would decide not to get married and become a male member. And then she was she could sit around with men, she could smoke, she could drink, she could dine, but her access to the female, the other women, was not restricted. So she could operate in both the realms. So her gender self was not taken away from her. So what I've really, in my writings, I've tried to argue is that the sadhan was one category which was both. She was both male and female. So, and purity or chastity were not the questions that were attached to her. In fact, if you ever, like, went to her village and asked about her, so the attitude could be one of ambivalence. Like, some would be very this thing that yes, wo pure hai, wo purush ho gayi hai, वो बहुत पवित्र है. And I'll come to this category of pavitra and make my last point and leave it there. And others would say कि अब हमारी बहनें हैं, हम थोड़ी उनके बारे में कुछ बोलेंगे. But then there were other men who were not our cousins, who were not our brothers, and so they would have their own tales and stories to tell. So it was, now in the Gaddis society, at least traditionally, it was not that you restrain from sexual activity that makes you pure. So it was basically the concept of menstruation, and that means that the age in which you can procreate, where is a period when you are a female, and when you have menstruation, you can be pure, bitty, or impure. These women also, sadhans, despite being male and allowed all other activities, when they were on the dhars and they were menstruating, then they will be removed from there for 3 or 4 days, and after cleansing, they'll go back to their tending their sheep and goats. So, and also the older women would call कि ये menstruation nahi hai, to ye purush ho gaye hain, and all. So it was really, so if we see in all these 3 categories, it is the power to create, or the power to procreate, and the power to withhold from procreation is what enables all these 3 women to exercise power, to negotiate very, very traditional spaces within the patriarchal system, to have more say in the affairs that concern their life directly. So I can probably stop here, and you can ask me questions.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for that insightful talk on gender and empowerment, and what all goes on, the nitty-gritties in society, which we wouldn't have known had you not had you studied the Gaddis so closely. So we will take our first question. Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya Panda, over to you, please.
Hello, Mali. This is a fascinating narrative.
Thank you.
And as I have worked on, my first work is on property inheritance in the law. So it is quite intriguing what your narrative had presented. I have one question, that is, so Gaddis have their own law, tribal law, but the British, they did not honor, they did not allow many tribes to retain their law. So they have drawn those communities who are not Muslims or Christians under Hindu law.
Yeah.
So did it happen in the case of Gaddis that they were drawn under colonial Hindu law and thereafter they were administered by Hindu Code Bill?
No, the British didn't touch them there, and I won't even call this, Gaddi tribal laws, because it was already a declared Hindu caste based, Varna based society. So, but what is what concerns the land, because the Chamba, it is more to do with the Chamba rulers and the concept of the property being the common property, the land not belonging to any one person. The British didn't touch it. It's only when so that is why even in the 90s, these traditions were very much prevalent. It is only when the private law by the government of India is introduced, where a woman could legitimately inherit property from her father, that these traditions began to lose their teeth. They didn't serve the purpose for which they were brought in the first place.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Now is the time to raise your hands. In the meantime, Kamakshi Rathore asks, ma'am, could you suggest any works that can help her delve into this narrative deeper, at a deeper level?
So I have this chapter here. I can type the book in the chat box. She can see that. Then, I'll best as I write my mail, you write to me and I'll give you other references as well that you can look into. Yeah. So wait a minute.
Ma'am, if you could write about it even in the WhatsApp group, I think then everybody can benefit from the title whenever you get a chance.
Okay, so this is my mail. This article of mine is in Gender and Rights. And it is edited by okay. Neville is another W.H. Neville's works you can refer to. Phillimore has got unpublished work on the women. A lot of work, but I don't think that many have really dealt with this aspect of the inheritance and empowerment issue. But you do have, like, you get your references in terms of what were the inheritance property inheritance law during the Chamba rule, or things like that. That is you get to know about their marriages. You can get to know about this deity Kelu, though the references doesn't go beyond abortion ka devta, and many other.
So, ma'am, I have a question, and after that, I'll take Ayushi Malhotra's question. My question is that when there is a conflict between, the traditions, customary law, and the law of the land, how do they negotiate the conflict? How is it done at the grassroots level?
See, as I told you in Shobharam's case, there were a lot of heartburns. Yeah, it's not like it came about easily, because it was no more a commonly practiced or a commonly known tradition anymore, even at that time. But of course, Shobharam knew about this. Obviously, his family knew about it, and they couldn't go against the tradition. It happens in the sense that it is really a woman's choice. Though initially there is a lot of pressure to marry one of the brothers, elder or younger or whatever, used to be. As I told you now, Gaddis is a very large middle class society. Women are educated, and this has become a nuclear family structures, and they're no more into traditional family practices as they used to be when you had this common hut. एक ही घर में चार चूल्हे and one property, still the property is held by them all together. Uh, and I'm not sure if her marriage to the chula was also always a very willing thing to do, because she had the choice to go back to her parents, so she could come back to her parents. She could renegotiate a marriage there. But that chulhe ki shadi used to happen. Chukhandu was a practice. I'm sure that, it's just that this ritual would be performed. She will take a decision as to one way or the other, and she will get married to the chula. वो उसका सब करके बाल गूंथ गूंथ के उसकी चूल्हे से शादी कर दी is a symbolic gesture, and after that she was free to procreate for the family.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll take Ayushi Malhotra's question. Over to you, Ayushi. If you could also introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sonali. And thank you, ma'am. This was very insightful, and I've read like a few of the things that you discussed today. And having my fieldwork, like I just finished my fieldwork recently. I'm also working with the Gaddi community, and I've personally visited all the places that you mentioned during your talk. So I see a very stark difference in how they narrate the stories now and what you've captured during your fieldwork. You rightly pointed out that half of the people do not even know about such traditions. So right now, my PhD is basically, my thesis looks at the transitions in their social ecology from a lens of livelihood, and I'm considering pastoralism as a center stage where I'm like locating my thesis. So I wanted to know more about if you can shed light on how the absence of men during their migration cycle, how did the women perform their gender during those times when you conducted the field work? So how was the life like during that time when the men were not around in the houses? As you said that there were many hearths in one kitchen. So was it that the women at that time were cooking food separately for everyone, even when the men were not around? What was the case like? How the daily life progressed? Ma'am?
Yeah, perhaps we've lost her. So let's just wait for her to come back.
Yeah, sure. No problem.
Yeah. In the meantime, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your own research and things that have been glaringly different from,
Yeah,
yeah, if you could just talk a little bit about that, and by then, ma'am will also come back.
sure, sure. So, as I told you that my thesis is on the socio-ecological transitions. So, gender obviously comes as a major category to look at how the transitions are taking place. Though I'm not focusing on this particular analytical category, but I couldn't even avoid it in my analysis. And recently, I presented that how re-examining gender remains important when we talk about the pastoral livelihood, especially. So even in case of Gaddis, I think like to maintain their pastoral system, to maintain their occupation, understanding how gender dynamics unfold within the community, it remains very important. So they couldn't, the men couldn't be away from the houses if the women did not take the charge of the household. It was that, it was like a very delicate balance that they maintained throughout. And as this lecture is themed on negotiating spaces, I think women negotiated not just spaces but different kind of roles within the community, traditionally and contemporarily both. So when men were away, they were like in charge of the houses. They made decision about various things, about children, about elderly care, about what happened to their fields, about the surplus, etc. and etc. So that particular decision-making power gave a lot of empowerment to the women at that time as well. And even today when I go there and I discuss these issues with the women, they are quite independent that way, even economically. I mean, the realms have changed. They're not like, into agriculture or into pastoralism. A lot of people are stepping out of pastoralism, but still that empowerment is there because it traditionally was.
Yeah,
It just comes along.
I'm glad you talked about this, because when we look at other communities and we kind of compare with the Gaddis, with the frequenting of men out for months on together, and the creation of a space where women could express their opinions and their decision making, which is lacking in other communities. And of course, when you look at, I study gender space in terms of the physical space, and I look at how everything is already structured. If you go to Rajasthan, for example, and the attire they wear, and where their kitchen is, and everything is all regulated, and the men are always there, so they do not have that freedom of absence which the Gaddis had. And like what you just said, that even today, traditionally, because they have had that independence, it has petered off to their present times, when economically they are becoming independent, but they already have that mindset because it was given to them in inheritance, like they were inculturated into those stories, into those traditions, and that's what makes them a little different, right?
Exactly, exactly. So I am more concerned about how the pastoral literature basically portrays the women in those communities where pastoralism still remains a form of livelihood, major form of livelihood. And when we talk about the case of Gaddis, I think it's extremely different from what we have in other communities, like for Raikas in Rajasthan. But at the same time, the underlying thing across these communities is this empowerment and negotiation that keeps on I mean, that keeps going on. Even in Raikas, we see that, the women of the houses, or the pastoral groups that they are part of, they are the ones who take care of all the financial activities among Raikas. So, I'm forgetting the author, but she mentions, okay, Rolfson, Colin Rolfson, she mentions about Raikas that, how the women of the Raika moving herd is called as a fox, a cunning fox, because she's the one who negotiates with the outer space. She deals with all the financial relationships, like all the things that they sell on their way, or they have to get the whole transaction done. So, yeah, that's quite interesting how these small spaces created here and there give that power to the women of these pastoral communities.
Yeah, and how over time it kind of changes their perception, the way that whole community looks forward, independent India. So, very fascinating what you're doing. And Ayushi, if you ever want to give a talk on our forum, you're welcome. Please write to us. You can write to Anjali ma'am, who's here, or any one of us who are, always there. We would love to host you, and would
Sure.
love to know about your research. Dr. Kaushal, just Molly Kaushal, just messaged that she's facing network issues. So we will stay a while, just in order to see whether she can come back. But meantime, I would love to open the forum for everybody else who wants to discuss and has some, pointers or something to share. Anyone who wants to share? Maybe Deepika, you are from the Gadi community. Maybe you could give us some insight. We see from a different lens, and you are a part of the new generation of the Gaddis. Maybe you can lend us your thoughts. Can Deepika hear me? Okay. Anyone who wants to share their views, you can put your videos on. Oh, Molly ma'am is back. Ma'am, over to you.
What was the question?
So Ayushi had a question that, Ayushi, could you repeat your question?
Yeah, sure. Ma'am, I had a question regarding the time when you conducted your field work. How do you see, or what were your experiences experiences with the women who were at home in the absence of the men. How did they negotiate their everyday lives? So I was really fascinated with the example that you gave of having more hearths in a kitchen, more than one. So I want to know that in the absence of the men or in the absence of other members of the house, how did the whole everyday thing happen? Like they cooked food separately, their whole everyday life, like, it was just divided
They
according to their hearts.
They shared a lot of things in common, and they will go out together for water, fodder. By and large, the relationship within the family remained cordial, as it does in our case. We have issues, we have strains, we have tensions, but we manage to get along with our sister-in-laws, mother-in-laws, don't we? So similarly, the same thing was happening there also. And at the same time, because as I said, that the area within the household that was the center of all the tensions of power and authority, right from the day one, the daughter-in-law could be given her separate chul, she could be given her separate hearth. So while she was cooking separately, she had the property was common, the flock that was there was common. So there was no division in the property. So a lot of other activities went on perfectly well and more harmoniously. And sometimes not so harmoniously.
Okay, that's wonderful. I mean, yeah, these are the things that I did not see during my fieldwork. I was just sharing my experiences with the Gaddi community. So even I came across this one thing. I went to this one household where I was even staying at Sachui. So they had bought a modern and a traditional chula. So they had this traditional chula outside their house, and they had this modern one, like a cooking stove inside. So the lady, the owner of that house, mentioned to me that when my mother-in-law, she has to work, she only works on that traditional one, she doesn't work on the modern one ever, if she has to at all. So yeah, I can see like where it's coming from. Maybe that's the whole traditional idea of dividing the hearth. Yeah.
And it's very difficult to work on traditional chula. The modern stove is so much more easy. अगर हमको ही बोल दें कि अभी जाओ और अंगीठी पे खाना पकाओ, you see the things have changed. Okay, those traditions had their relevance and their importance so long as the property was a joint property, and it could not be handed over even to a sister, daughter's husband or to a daughter's child. Now, as your structures change, then the relationships and the spaces that come to symbolize those relationships also undergo a lot of change. But that tradition exists and it can be invoked, and it is invoked when it is needed. But now more and more in cases of, very remote villages where, still the traditional patterns of sharing the hearth exist. It doesn't exist anymore. I mean, if you go to Sachui or you go to Vermont, it's a town now. So there's a big difference.
I would like to add, like how you say that it is invoked when it needs to be invoked. Even if we look at non-Gaddi communities, if we look at the Himachali dham, they start using the chulha only when there's a dham, there's a traditional kind of festival or some occasion. So that's true. Things have changed so much that we cannot, go back in time. But it's so nice that research like what Dr. Kaushal has done helps you, Ayushi, in today's research that you're doing, to be able to have that lens from the point of view of Dr. Molly Kaushal and see the change that has happened in, just 30 or so years, and such drastic change, and that it's all documented, speaks volumes of the hard work that has gone into it and which will continue to happen. So we are very lucky that we have that before us, and that's why it's so important to keep documenting, to keep researching, so that we can leave this legacy for a long time for others to work on and compare and contrast. Yeah.
those rituals are, see, the rituals are still followed, but now the rituals are not understood anymore in relation to the traditions that existed, to the
I think we lost her again. Yeah. So does anybody in the meantime want to kind of talk? Oh, ma'am is back. She's back.
unstable connection.
Yeah.
Probably,
Yeah.
the,
So, ma'am, let us know if you want us to kind of end, if there are no questions, so we don't trouble you with the network issues that you're
yeah.
facing.
So I think it's better to end today, and we meet next time. We can take up this and many more other issues. Uh, I would be talking on body healing and healer chanters
Yeah,
the next
next
yeah.
weekend. Yeah. So we're really looking forward
Next
to,
week or whatever will be decided. Yeah,
yeah. So
and if
ma'am
we
will be coming back with the continuation of a series so that we can all know the Gaddis up close and personal. So we'll end today's evening with a dedication to Ramlal Thakurji, who was close to Dr. Kaushal and her work, and his daughter is here too. So, in ode to him, this Himalayan Nomad series. Ma'am, if you would like to say a few more words, and then we can end today's talk.
so yes, the last line, if we want to really kind of, take it, that I'll say that whether you look at the Gadi metaphysics, or you look at its rituals, or you look at the myths, or you look at the social realm, the feminine principle actually occupies a very, very prominent role and very prominent position. And it is this that then moves on to constitute a much larger, discourse of what we have, the Manu, the Shiva, and the Parvati continuum.
Yeah, ma'am, we lost you midway.
So all these realms are really, really interlinked, and they all are interconnected, and they interdependent, and they inform each other. So if you're just going to go and work on kinship, or you're just going to go on marriage among the Gaddis, or if you're going to just go and work only on the mythology, then the threads, that the entire fabric, you will never be able to see that in its integratedness. You would only see certain parts of the whole, but you will never reach the whole. So it's very important that when we are doing communities, we do very, very integrated studies, which so the social life doesn't exist outside the realm of the myth, and the myth doesn't exist outside the realm of the social.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We look forward to your next talk in the series. We'll keep everybody posted on our social media platforms. This week, we'll go live with our website as well, and most of the talks will be there. So, thank you so much, Dr. Kaushal, for your wonderful talk, and we look forward to more. And have a wonderful evening, all of you who've joined us for the first time today.
Then we also have Kamal coming from Trinidad again. I think she switched off, or I could have said hello to her.
Yeah.
And thank you, Deepika, for being there, and my tribute to Ramdalji. Thank you, Sonali, for hosting.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye, everyone.
Bye.